"You are not my daughter," my dad said, his voice cold as ice, before cutting me out of his will. But he had no idea what was coming next. "Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about." My name is Emily Carter. I grew up in a quiet town, the kind where everyone knew who my dad was. Richard Carter wasn't just my father. He was a man people respected. He owned a successful construction company, and people admired his discipline and work ethic. He wasn't the warmest person, but he was strong, dependable, and I always thought he loved me in his own way. Since I was little, I did everything I could to make him proud. I studied hard, got good grades, and followed every rule he set. Unlike some kids, I didn't talk back or try to rebel. Deep down, I just wanted him to look at me and see someone worthy of his respect. And sometimes I felt like I had it. He would take me to his job sites, show me blueprints, and tell me about how he built everything from nothing. Those moments were rare, but they meant the world to me. I grew up believing I was his favorite child. He wasn't the kind of dad who said, "I love you" often, but when he'd call me his little architect, or ask for my opinion on something small, it felt like his way of showing it. I carried those moments like treasures. Life in our house was strict. He had rules for everything: how the table should be set, how long the lights could stay on, even how we were supposed to answer the phone. Some people might have called it harsh, but I thought it made sense. He believed discipline built character, and I wanted to live up to his standards. I remember nights when I'd stay up late studying, just so he'd notice my grades. When he had his first heart surgery, I barely left his side. I cooked, cleaned, and handled errands to make sure he didn't have to worry. He never said thank you, but I told myself he noticed. I told myself he was proud. Because of that, I carried this quiet confidence in me, that no matter how hard he was on everyone else, I was different. I was the one he trusted, the one he relied on. That belief shaped everything I did. Even when people said Richard Carter was a tough man to love, I didn't care. To me, he was my dad, and I was his daughter. That bond felt unshakable, as if nothing could tear it apart. I had no idea how wrong I was. When my father fell sick, it happened so suddenly that no one was ready for it. He had always seemed strong, the kind of man who could push through anything. But the illness weakened him fast, and for the first time, I saw him fragile. Doctors said he needed rest and time, and though I was worried, I believed he would recover. When he finally came home from the hospital, our family gathered more often than usual. My stepmother, Anna, hovered close to him. My younger half-brother, Daniel, walked around like he was suddenly the man of the house. I didn't think much of it at first. All I wanted was for Dad to get better. Not long after, we were called to the lawyer's office for the reading of his will. I thought it was too soon. He was still alive, still with us, and hearing about a will felt unnecessary. But Dad insisted everything had to be in order. So, I went believing it would just be a formality. The lawyer opened the folder and began to read. At first, everything sounded normal: formal words, legal terms, nothing that stood out. Then, the words hit me like a slap. My name wasn't there. Not for the house, not for the company, not for anything. Every single thing was left to Daniel. I sat frozen, unable to process what I was hearing. My father, the man I had devoted my life to, had erased me as if I didn't exist. Daniel smirked, pretending to hide his smile, while Anna sat with her hand on his shoulder like this was something she had known all along. My chest tightened, my hands shook. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, some mix-up with the papers. But as the lawyer continued, it became clear. This was intentional. My father had written me out completely. After the meeting, I couldn't hold back. I followed him into his room, my voice trembling as I asked, "Why? Why did you cut me out? What did I do to deserve this?" He didn't look at me with love, or even with the sternness I was used to. He looked at me like a stranger. His eyes were hard, cold, and filled with something I couldn't understand. And then he said the words that broke me. "You are not my daughter." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was like the ground beneath me cracked open. I wanted him to take it back, to explain, to say he didn't mean it. But he didn't. He turned away, as if I no longer had the right to stand there. I left the room with tears burning my eyes, my heart pounding in my chest. The man I had trusted and loved my whole life had thrown me away in a single sentence, and I had no idea why. I left my father's house that night in pieces. His words echoed in my head again and again. "You are not my daughter." I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I just kept asking myself what he meant. I had always been his child. How could he deny me like that? The confusion was worse than the pain. I needed answers, and the only person who could give them to me was my mother. I called her, my voice breaking, and asked if I could come over. She didn't ask questions, just told me to come right away. When I walked into her house, she saw my face and knew something was terribly wrong. I sat at her kitchen table, my hands shaking as I repeated what Dad had said. "He told me I'm not his daughter," I whispered. The look on her face said everything before she even opened her mouth. She went pale, her lips pressed tightly together, and I could see she was fighting tears. For a long moment, she didn't say a word. Then she reached across the table and held my hands, her eyes full of guilt. "Emily," she said softly, "there's something I've kept from you. I never wanted you to find out this way." Her voice trembled as she explained. Years ago, when she was still married to my father, their relationship had been rocky. He worked long hours, and she felt lonely and neglected. In that weak moment, she had a brief affair. She swore it ended quickly, and she regretted it every day after. But that mistake had consequences. My chest felt tight as the words sank in. I wanted to deny it, to tell her she was wrong, but deep down I knew she wouldn't say something like this unless it was true. I asked if Dad had known all along. She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "He found out years ago, Emily. He agreed to raise you as his own because he loved me, and because he couldn't bring himself to destroy the family. But he never forgave me, and I think he never forgave you." The pieces started to fit together in my mind. His coldness, his distance, the way he sometimes looked at me like I was a reminder of something he hated. I had told myself it was just his nature, but maybe it was more than that. I felt like the ground had been pulled from under me. The man I had called Dad wasn't my father by blood, and the woman I trusted most had lied to me my entire life. The love I thought was real suddenly felt like an illusion, a fragile picture that shattered the moment the truth came out. I sat there in silence, my body numb. My mother begged me to understand, to see that she had loved me no less because of her mistake. But the truth was too heavy. My life had changed in an instant, and nothing would ever be the same again. The days after I learned the truth were some of the darkest of my life. I felt like I had been living in a house built on sand, and overnight it had all collapsed. My father had rejected me, my mother had lied to me, and suddenly I didn't know where I belonged. I kept thinking back to all the years I had given up for him. When he had his heart surgery, I had stayed by his side every day. I was the one who drove him to his appointments, made his meals, and checked on him late at night when he struggled to breathe. While my friends were going out and enjoying their 20s, I was in that house making sure he lived. And now it felt like none of it mattered. He had erased me with a single sentence. Every memory I had with him twisted into something painful. The times I thought he was proud of me now felt like lies. I couldn't stop asking myself, did he ever really care, or was he only pretending out of duty? That thought alone broke me more than his words. But the pain didn't stop with him. Daniel, my younger half-brother, took every chance to remind me of where I stood. One evening, I came by the house to pick up some of my things. He leaned against the doorway, a smug look on his face. "You were never really one of us anyway," he said. His voice carried that cruel satisfaction of someone who had won. The words cut deep. I had grown up with him, played with him, even helped him with school projects. I had thought of him as my brother, blood or not. But now I saw the truth. He had never seen me the same way. To him, I was an outsider who no longer had any place in their world. I left the house carrying a small box of my belonging. It felt like I was carrying the weight of my entire life in that box. Broken trust, wasted years, and a heart that no longer knew where it belonged. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling like my entire life had been stolen from me. I thought about my childhood, about all the times I tried to win his approval, and it all seemed meaningless now. I felt betrayed not just by one parent, but by both. My mother had lied, and my father had chosen hate over love. It was a pain that cut deeper than I knew was possible. I wasn't just grieving the loss of a father. I was grieving the loss of my identity, of the family I thought I had, and of the belief that love could withstand mistakes. For the first time in my life, I was truly alone. I reached a point where the tears stopped coming. For days, I had cried until my eyes burned, but eventually something inside me hardened. I realized there was no point in begging my father to see me differently or asking Daniel to treat me like family. They had made their choice, and nothing I said would change it. One afternoon, I walked through the house one last time. Every corner held memories, but they no longer felt like mine. The family photos on the walls, the furniture I had polished, even the kitchen table where we once sat together, all of it now belonged to someone else. I packed a single suitcase and left the rest behind. I didn't want their things. I wanted my freedom. When I closed the door behind me, I felt something shift. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of trying to please my father. The pain was still there, sharp and heavy, but under it was a spark of determination. If he didn't see my worth, then I would show him, and not with words, but with the life I built for myself. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom with old floors and thin walls, but it was mine. I paid the rent with what I earned at my job and refused to touch the little savings I had set aside. I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet, without relying on a single thing connected to Richard Carter's name. Every morning, I looked in the mirror and reminded myself that his rejection didn't define me. I was still Emily. I was still capable, hardworking, and determined. I told myself I would not just survive, I would thrive. I would build something better than what he had denied me. I threw myself into my work, taking on extra hours and side projects. Architecture had always been my passion, and I began to see it not just as a career, but as my way forward. The more I worked, the stronger I felt. I stopped thinking about what I had lost and started focusing on what I could create. There were moments of doubt, of course. Some nights I lay awake wondering if I could really do it on my own. But each time, I reminded myself of everything I had already endured. I had lived through betrayal, lies, and rejection from the very people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. If I could survive that, I could survive anything. Walking away from that house was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was also the beginning of my freedom. I no longer needed Richard's approval, his wealth, or his name. I only needed myself, and the strength to prove that his decision to cut me out would be the biggest mistake of his life. The new apartment was quiet, sometimes too quiet, but it became the place where I started over. I poured my energy into work. Architecture had always been something that made me feel alive, and now it became more than a job. It became my lifeline. I took every opportunity one could find, even small side projects that barely paid. I designed porches, remodeled kitchens, and helped local businesses with layouts. Each project gave me a sense of pride, because it was something I built with my own hands and my own mind. The more I worked, the more I realized how much I had been holding back before. I used to balance my time between caring for my father and building my career. Now, with nothing tying me down to that house, I gave myself permission to go all in. Late nights sketching designs turned into mornings filled with meetings and site visits. My calendar was always full, but I liked it that way. It reminded me that I was moving forward. During this time, the person who stood by me the most was my best friend, Sarah Mitchell. We had known each other since college, and she had seen me at my best and my worst. When I finally told her everything that had happened, she didn't try to fix it with empty words. She just listened, let me cry, and reminded me that my worth didn't depend on Richard Carter. "Emily," she told me one night as we sat in her living room, "you can't let bitterness eat you alive. I know you're hurt, but you're stronger than this. Use it. Build something that's yours, something no one can take away from you." Her words stuck with me. She was right. I couldn't change the past, but I could decide how I wanted to live from now on. I began to shift my focus from anger to ambition. Instead of replaying his rejection in my head, I put that energy into my work. Sarah cheered me on through every small victory. When I landed my first independent contract, she brought over takeout and a bottle of wine to celebrate. When I doubted myself, she reminded me of how far I'd already come. She was the kind of friend who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself, and that gave me the strength to keep going. Months turned into a year, and slowly my reputation grew. Clients recommended me to others, and word began to spread about the young architect who delivered quality work. I wasn't rich, but I was stable, and for the first time in my life, I felt like my future belonged to me. Looking back, I realized that losing my father's approval had given me something unexpected: freedom. I no longer lived in his shadow, no longer chased after his love. I was building a life on my own terms, supported not by a family who rejected me, but by the true friends who never let me fall. 2 years passed, and the woman I had become was very different from the one who walked out of that house with a single suitcase. The pain was still a part of me, but I had turned it into fuel. With long nights, countless drafts, and endless meetings, I had built my own architecture firm from nothing. At first it was just me working from a desk in my apartment, but slowly I hired a small team. We weren't big, but we were determined, and clients appreciated the personal touch we gave every project. The turning point came when the city announced a huge contract to design and manage a new civic center. It was the kind of project that could put a firm on the map, the kind that every architect dreamed of landing. I knew the competition would be fierce, but I wanted it. My team wanted it. We poured our energy into creating a proposal that was bold, practical, and fresh. When I submitted it, I learned that Daniel's company was also bidding. For a moment, my stomach sank. I could already picture him smirking, telling everyone how I didn't belong in their family, much less in their business world. But instead of letting the thought scare me, it pushed me harder. I refused to back down. Weeks later, I got the call. My firm had been chosen. We had beaten Daniel's company. I sat at my desk in silence, holding the phone in my hand, barely able to breathe. Then the reality hit me: we had done it. Not because of my father's name, not because of family connections, but because of hard work and talent. The news spread quickly. Articles in the local paper highlighted my story: young architect lands major city project. They talked about my small firm, about the unique design we had proposed, and about the determination it took to win against bigger, older companies. My name was everywhere, not as Richard Carter's daughter, but as Emily Carter, architect and business owner. I didn't plan for him to see it, but of course he did. My father had always paid attention to city projects, and this one was too big to miss. I later heard from someone close to the family that when he saw my picture in the paper, he went pale. He had expected me to disappear, to fade into nothing without his support. Instead, I was rising higher than he ever imagined. For me, the sweetest part wasn't revenge in the cruel sense. It was the quiet victory of proving him wrong. I didn't need his wealth, his approval, or even his name. I had built a future on my own. And now he had no choice but to see me as I truly was. Not the daughter he denied, but the woman who had succeeded without him. While my firm was slowly gaining respect, the same could not be said for Daniel. He had inherited everything from our father, but he didn't have the discipline or patience to manage it. The company Richard had built over decades started to change under Daniel's hand. He spent recklessly, hired people who flattered him instead of people who knew the work, and chased deals that looked shiny on the surface, but had no stability underneath. At first, he bragged about how much bigger his projects were compared to mine. He threw parties, bought expensive cars, and acted like success was his birthright. But money spent without care doesn't last long. His choices caught up with him faster than anyone expected. Within a year, whispers began spreading in the business community. Subcontractors complained about late payments. Clients pulled out of contracts because promises weren't kept. By the second year, the company was bleeding money. Debts piled up, and creditors began knocking at his door. The Carter name, once tied to respect and stability, became a joke. People started avoiding Daniel, not wanting to get caught up in the mess. The empire Richard had worked his whole life to build was collapsing, brick by brick, because his chosen heir didn't know how to hold it together. Meanwhile, Richard's health continued to fail. Age and illness had worn him down, and the stress of watching his company crumble only made him weaker. The strong man who had once seemed untouchable now looked frail, his hair thinning, his hands trembling. He saw the empire he trusted Daniel with slipping away, and it broke him in a way sickness never could. Those close to him told me later that he rarely spoke about it, but when he did, there was regret in his voice. He realized too late that Daniel cared more about wealth than responsibility. He also realized the truth he had refused to admit, that I was the one who had cared for him, the one who had stood by him when he was sick, the one who had been loyal even when he was cold. But by the time that understanding came, the damage was done. His pride had cost him everything, his company, his reputation, and the daughter he had cast aside. The man who once told me I wasn't his child now sat surrounded by the ruins of his own choices. I wasn't there to see it myself, but the image of him sitting pale and broken in that big house, watching his world collapse, stayed in my mind. It was the kind of justice I never asked for, but life had delivered anyway. He had chosen Daniel over me, and now he was left with nothing but regret. The call came on a quiet evening. I almost didn't answer when I saw the number, but something inside me told me to pick up. It was Anna, my stepmother. Her voice was tired, strained. She said Richard wanted to see me. For a moment, I couldn't speak. After everything he had done, after the words that had cut me to pieces, now he wanted me back in that house. I hesitated for days, unsure if I could face him again. Part of me wanted to ignore the request and let him sit with the consequences of his choices. But another part of me needed closure. I needed to hear what he had to say, even if it didn't change anything. So I went. When I walked into the house, the place felt different. The energy was gone, replaced with silence and shadows. I was led to his room, and the sight of him stopped me cold. My father, once so strong and commanding, now looked frail and small against the pillows. His skin was pale, his shoulders slumped, and his eyes held a weariness I had never seen before. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then he whispered my name. His voice was weak, trembling. He asked me to sit. I did, but I kept my distance. I was wrong, he said finally, his eyes glistening. I let anger and pride blind me. I should never have said those words to you. I should never have turned you away. The sound of him apologizing should have given me comfort, but it didn't. It only reminded me of the years I had begged silently for his approval, the nights I sat by his side after surgery, the loyalty I had given without question. And when I had needed him most, he had thrown me aside. I cared for you when no one else did, I said softly. I gave you everything I had, and you chose to push me away. You chose your pride over love. His lips trembled and tears filled his eyes. You are my daughter, he said, his voice breaking. Not by blood, but in every way that mattered. Forgive me. I wanted to give him what he asked for, but my heart wasn't ready. The wounds were too deep. I stood, looking down at him with steady eyes. I am your daughter in every way that mattered, I told him, my voice calm but firm. But you'll have to live with the choices you made. I can't carry that burden for you. I turned to leave. Behind me, I heard him sob, a sound I had never once heard from him before. It was the sound of a man finally realizing what he had lost, and knowing it was too late to take it back. I walked out of that house with a heavy heart, but also with a strange sense of peace. For the first time, I had spoken my truth, and he had heard it. It was only a few weeks after our last conversation that the news reached me. Richard had passed away in his sleep. For a moment, I just sat still, holding the phone, unsure of what I felt. There was sadness, but not the kind that comes from losing someone close. It was more like the quiet ache of what could have been, of the bond we never truly had. The funeral was arranged quickly. Part of me wondered if I should go at all. After everything, I didn't know him anything. But deep down, I knew I needed to be there, not for him, but for myself. I needed to close the chapter once and for all. On the day of the funeral, the church was filled with people who had once admired him. Business partners, old friends, and distant relatives came to pay their respects. But I noticed how different the atmosphere was compared to the past. There was no pride in the Carter name anymore, only whispers about the company's downfall and the debts left behind. His legacy, the thing he valued most, was gone. I sat quietly in the back, watching as Daniel stood in the front row. He looked nervous, uneasy, as if the weight of what he had lost was finally hitting him. The man who had gloated when everything was his now stood in the ruins of it all. It was a picture of what greed and arrogance can do. When it was time to say goodbye, I walked to the casket. I looked at him one last time, lying still and cold, a shadow of the man I had once tried so hard to love. I felt no anger anymore, only acceptance. He had made his choices, and those choices had shaped the end of his life. I whispered softly, not for anyone else to hear. I was always your daughter, even if you couldn't see it. Then I turned and walked away. As I stepped out of the church, the air felt lighter. The weight I had carried for years seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet strength. I knew I wasn't leaving with bitterness or regret. I was leaving with freedom. I thought about everything I had built in the past 2 years. My firm, my independence, my own sense of worth. None of it came from his name or his wealth. It came from me. And in that moment, I realized I was stronger than I had ever believed. Family isn't just blood. Family is the people who stand by you when the world turns its back. For me, that was Sarah, my team, and the life I had created. That truth mattered more than anything Richard could have left in a will. I walked away from the funeral not as the daughter he rejected, but as the woman I had become, whole, independent, and unshaken. The past was over, and the future was mine to claim.